I have a couple of stories tonight, kind of in the theme, which as I read the theme, I kind of interpreted it as a going from bad to good. New beginnings from bad to good, and certainly these stories have reflected that tonight. My stories are both coming from newspapers, and that's kind of the connection. One's a little short, silly one, and then I got a serious one. I want to end with a serious one on. But the first one, and which, by the way, I know several people here that I know on the screen have probably heard this one story, but I like it so much I'm going to tell it anyway. It's just kind of fun to tell, and it makes me feel good. And I saw it in the paper, and I saw it in the paper, and this lady had written this article, and it had to do with positive attitudes. And so I sent her, I wanted to be nice, and I sent her an email and said, look, I'm a storyteller. I'd love to tell your story. Do I have your permission to tell it? And she said, well, I stole it from somebody else, so I don't even remember where I got it, so go ahead. And so I did, because I like it anyway, so I don't know who originated this, but I just love it. It's a little short thing. There was this lady who was always positive in her life. But she was getting older, and she noticed that her hair was starting to fall out. And one day she went into the mirror, and she noticed that all the hair in her head had fallen out except for 3 hairs. And she thought, oh my gosh. But you know what? I think I'll braid them today. And she did, and she went out and she had a really good day. The next day she goes in, goes to fix her up like the ladies do every morning. 2 hairs left. Oh my goodness. I think I'll part them down the middle today. And she did, and she went out and she had an absolutely great day. The next day, she goes in, 1 hair left. She looks in the mirror and she says, well, you know, I think I'll wear a ponytail today. And she did, and she went out and had an absolutely great day. Well, the next day, she goes in, and as you've probably guessed, that final hair had fallen out. And she looked in the mirror and she said, well, I don't have to fix my hair today. And she went out and she had an absolutely great day. And I just absolutely love that story about being positive about life and moving on. The other story is a serious one, also from a newspaper last spring. I picked up the paper and there was an article in there about a man who had passed away. And this was not an obituary, but a story about the man and a funeral. And it turns out that the man had been something of a hero. And as I read the article, all of a sudden, reading about him and what he had done that day brought back a flood of memories to me. And that flood, I started that morning at the office. I worked in east of Oklahoma City, Midwest City School District. And that morning, around 9 o'clock, it was kind of, something. I don't know if I heard it, I felt it. Somehow I'd experienced something. I don't know what it was, so I kind of walked out in the hall, and other people were kind of saying, well, did you hear that, or did you feel that? And nobody knew what it was, and we started speculating. Well, a lot of people don't know, but central Oklahoma has a lot of earthquakes. There was a period of time for several years we had some pretty severe ones. Well, of course, it was an earthquake. We also were just a couple miles from Tinker Air Force Base and said, well, you know what? It could be that they're testing one of those big old engines out there. You know those big old bombers they have out there? Maybe one took off, or maybe they're testing. But we're not sure if that was it or not. We don't know. And, hey, you remember those several years ago? They ran those sonic boom tests in our area, and it could have been that, but no one for sure. So people were saying, what was it? Well, I walked over across the hall on the north side of the building to the curriculum department, where they had some televisions there in that area. And they were looking at the television, trying to figure out if there's anything there. And the news people would come on and say, well, there's been a reported something. We're not quite sure what it is. And they were watching television. And they said, well, we think it might have been an explosion in downtown Oklahoma City. Well, all of a sudden now, well, we probably know what that was. You know, we heat with natural gas in Oklahoma a lot. It's a very common deal. It probably was a natural gas explosion. But then the news people started saying, well, no, we think it might have been something else. And we think it might have been in this federal building downtown. And this, when the news people started talking about that, it kind of took on another importance because, see, there was a lady who worked there, a good friend, her name is Lynn, whose husband worked in the federal building in downtown Oklahoma City. And in fact, he was in charge of that particular building. And so now all of a sudden we're kind of concerned for Lynn and Richard, her husband. What we did not know was at the moment we were kind of watching television and speculating, Richard was lying in rubble in this building in Oklahoma City, which had just experienced the most severe domestic terrorist activity up to that time in the nation. Big time deal. And then, of course, after that, over the next several days, there are just hundreds, if not thousands, of various stories that come along. It was an interesting time to be in this part of the state. Everyone felt a part of this. Everyone wanted to help. After a couple of days, my wife and I we drove down there. We wanted to see the building. And it was kind of interesting because they'd put up a barrier fence so that the workers could work on the building and the rescue efforts and so on were going on. This fence had now become covered with teddy bears and flowers and letters and all kinds of memorabilia, people expressing their concern. And it was eerily quiet when you drove down there. It was a zone where respect was a really big deal, and you wanted to show respect. Everyone drove with their lights on. For days, if you drove, you had your lights on. A simple act of participation. Occasionally, the news would say, hey, the rescue workers are running out of batteries. Can you bring some batteries? And they'd give the address. And 10 minutes later, there'd be another announcement by the TV people say, quit bringing batteries. We have so many batteries, we don't need any more. Quit doing that. And if you went down there and you're driving by, people would come up to your car because the restaurants had provided food for the workers who are coming from all over the country and, in fact, internationally to help. You drive up, you roll down your window and say, hey, you want some sandwiches? This is from so-and-so. We have more food here than we can eat. We're sharing it with everyone. So those are the kind of memories this newspaper article stirred up in me, flooded in me that the day I was last spring when this article was published. It was published about this 75-year-old man who had been part of that. He had recently passed away, and he was considered a hero at the funeral. It turns out Mr. Washburn worked in that building. In fact, he had the concession stand on the 4th floor. You know about a lot of federal buildings, in fact, state buildings, government buildings, will have, if they're a large building, they'll have a little concession area. They'll, you know, if you come to work and you haven't had your breakfast, well, there's a place you can get some coffee, an orange juice, a donut, whatever, a sandwiches at lunch, a coffee break, Cokes, candy here and there. Those are kind of typical things. Well, that's what Mr. Washburn did. He had that stand. And he was there that morning. And I was trying to imagine what it must have been like for him. He was there. He had one employee there. And there were 4 customers. You know, I experienced something 10 miles away. I wonder what it was like when you're 100 feet away. I wonder what the sound was like when you were 100 feet away. I wonder what the light was like. You had to have been dazed. You had to have been stunned in some way. part of the building's gone. It's laying there on the ground. Some lights are gone. I mean, the power shut off. So there are dark places, and then there are light places where the building's gone. The sound, I'm assuming by then you probably can't hear it very well. It's probably ringing in your ears. I don't know. You're covered probably in this white dust think of all the sheetrock on those walls that were pulverized, and it's in the air now, and you can't see, you can't smell, and you're covered with this white dust. Everyone is just dazed. But Mr. Washburn says to his employee and those 4 customers, "We have to get out of here. Follow me." And he goes down the hall because he's been there long enough that he knows the building. I mean, he knows where he's going. And so they follow him to the stairwell, 4th floor, and they go down the stairwell. Now, I don't know if there was emergency lighting in the stairwell or not. I don't know if it was light, dark, I don't know. But he got them, for some reason, I'm sure they're all dazed too, so anybody with a strong voice saying, "Follow me," probably got their attention. Down the stairwell, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor. Finally, you're out into the open, and I assume at that point, rescue workers, firemen, whatever, took them into safety. Mr. Washburn led the way. He rose to the occasion. But what is especially important about this that really caught my attention, you see, Mr. Washburn was blind. He led the way, and a lady at the funeral who was his friend said that his heart illuminated the darkness. And I just think that of the hundreds and thousands of stories, I just think that was a nice little piece of that story. And I also want to tell you, audience tonight, that one of the people watching in, if you'll see her on the screen, her name is Lynn Weems, is the lady whose husband was in the rubble. Very good personal friend. I'll tell you how good friends we are. We now share grandkid stories. But she was the lady, and her husband survived, and they've traveled the country telling this story. And when I told them I was going to tell this story tonight, they said that they thought it was important that the story of the Oklahoma City Murrah bombing not be lost to history. Because this was in '95, this is a while ago. None of my grandkids know anything about it, but they thought it was important. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to share this story with everyone tonight. And I appreciate Gary and Motel folks for making this whole opportunity available. Thank you very much for this.